His face changed and he went without closing the door. I jumped up and slammed it with an incredible crash. Then from under the bed I pulled out the paper. But now I could not find in what I had just been reading. I examined it from beginning to end. Nothing. Could I have dreamt reading it? I started looking through the pages afresh. It was like a nightmare where things get lost, and not only can it not be discovered, but there are none of those natural laws which lend to the search a certain logic, instead of which everything is absurdly shapeless and arbitrary. No, there was nothing about me in the paper, nothing at all. I must probably have been in an awful state of blind excitement, because a few seconds later I noticed that the paper was an old German rag and not the Paris one which I had been reading. Diving under the bed again, I retrieved it and reread the trivially worded, even libelous communication. Now it dawned upon me what had shocked me most, shocked me as an insult. Not a word was there about our resemblance. Not only was it not criticized, for instance, they might have said at least, yes, an admirable resemblance, yet such and such markings show it not to be his body. But it was not mentioned at all, which left one with the impression that it was some wretch whose appearance was quite different from mine. Now one single night could not very well have decomposed him. On the contrary, his countenance ought to have acquired a marble quality, making our likeness still no more sharply chiseled. But even if the body had been found quite a few days later, thus giving playful death time to tamper with it, all the same stages of decomposition would have tallied with mine. Darned hasty way of putting it, I am afraid, but I am in no mood for niceties. This affected ignorance of what, to me, though as most precious and all-important, struck me as an extremely cowardly trick, implying as it did that from the very first everybody knew perfectly well that it was not I, that it was simply could never have entered his head to mistake the corpse for mine, and the slipshod way in which the story was told seemed itself to stress a solecism which I could certainly never have committed. And still there were mouths hidden, snouts turned away, silent, but all a-quiver, the ruffians, bubbling over with joy, yes, with an evil, vindictive joy, yes, vindictive, jeering, unbearable. Again there came a knock. I sprang to my feet, gasping. The door of the manager appeared. Voila, said the doctor in a deeply hurt voice, addressing the manager and pointing at me. There, that gentleman not only took offense at something I never said, but now insulted me, refusing to hear me out and being extremely rude. Will you please talk to him? I am not used to such manners. Il faut s'exprimer. I must thrash it out, said the manager, glowering at me darkly. I am sure that the monsieur himself be God, I yelled, stamping my foot. The things you are doing to me is beyond. You dare not humiliate me and take revenge. I demand, do you hear, I demand. The doctor and the manager, both with raised palms and in clockwork style, prancing on stiff legs, started gibbering at me, strutting ever closer. I could not stand it any longer, but my fit of passion passed, and in its stead I felt the pressure of tears, and suddenly, leaving victory of whoever sought it, I fell upon my bed and sobbed violently. Nerves, just nerves, said the doctor, softening as if it was by magic. The manager smiled and left the room, closing the door with great gentleness. The doctor poured out a glass of water for me, offered to bring a soothing drug, stroked my shoulder, and I sobbed on and went perfectly conscious of my condition. Even so, the cold mocking lucidity, its shame, and at the same time I felt all the dusky charm of hysterics, and also something dimly advantageous of me. So I continued to shake and heave as I wiped my cheeks with large, sturdy, meat-smelling handkerchief, which the doctor gave me, while he patted me and muttered soothingly, only a misunderstanding. Moi coup de toujours. I was my usual saying that we've all had our fill of wars. You forgot your defects, we've got ours. Politics should be forgotten. You've simply not understood what we were talking about. I was simply inquiring what you thought of that murder. What murder? I asked through my sobs. Oh, une sale affair, a beastly business. Changed clothes with a man and killed him. But appease yourself, my friends. It is not only Germany that murderers exist. We have our laundress, thank heaven, so you are not alone. Calmez-vous. It is all nerves. Local water acts beautifully upon the nerves, or more exactly upon the stomach. Ce cas revient à mine d'allures. He went on with his powder for a little while and then rose. I returned to the handkerchief with thanks. Know what? He said when he was already standing in the doorway. The little countess is quite infatuated with you, so you ought to play us something on the piano tonight. He ran his fingers in the semblance of a trill. And believe me, you'll have her in your Betty. He was practically in the passage, but all at once changed his mind and came back. In the days of my youth and folly, he said, when we students were once making merry, the most blasphemous fellow among us got especially tight, so as soon as he reached the helpless stage, we dressed him up in a cassock, shaved a round patch on his pate, and late at night knocked at the door of a cloister, whereupon a nun appeared, and one of us said to her, Ah, monsieur, voyez d'un quel triste attachiste. Monsieur pauvre abbe, see this poor priest's sorry condition. Take him, let him sleep it off in one of your cells. And fancy, the nuns took him. What a laugh we had. The doctor lowered his haunches slightly and slapped them. The thought suddenly occurred to me that who knows, maybe he was saying all this disguised to him. wanted him to pass for someone else, with a certain secret design that maybe he was sent to spy, and again fury possessed me, but glancing at his foolishly beaming wrinkles, I controlled myself, pretending to laugh, and waved his hands very contentedly, and at last, he left me in peace. In spite of a grotesque resemblance to Raskolnikov, no, that's wrong, cancelled. What came next? Yes, I decided the very first thing to do was to obtain as many newspapers as possible. I ran downstairs. On one of the landings I happened upon the fat Abby, who looked at me with commiseration. From the oily smile I deduced that the doctor had already managed to tell the world of our reconciliation. Coming out into the court, I was at once half stunned by the wind. I did not give in, though, but clapped myself eagerly against the gate, and then the bus appeared. I signaled to it. I climbed in, and we rolled downhill, while the white dust madly whirling. In town I got several German delis, and took the occasion to call the post office. There was no letter for me, but on the other hand I found the papers full of news, much too full, alas, today after a week of all-absorbing literary labor. I am cured and feel only content, but at the time the cold sneering tone of the press almost drove me crazy. Here is the general picture I finally put together. On Sunday noon, the 10th of March, in a wood, hairdresser from a Königsdorf found a dead body. How he came to be in that wood, which even in summer remained unfrequented, and why it was only in the evening that he made his find known, are the puzzles still unsolved. Next follows that screaming funny story which I have, I think, mentioned already. The car purposefully left by me in the border of the wood was gone. Its imprints, successions of T's, established the make of the irises. Memories collected as having seen a blue Icarus pass, small model, wire wheels, to which the bright and pleasant fellows at the garage in my street added information concerning horsepower and cylinders, and gave not only the car's police number, but also the factory, one of the engine and chassis. The general assumption is that at the very instant I am spinning about in the Icarus somewhere, which is deliciously ludicrous. Now it is obvious to me that somebody saw my car from the highway, and without further ado appropriated it, overlooking in his hurry the corpse lying close by. Inversely, the hairdresser, who did notice the corpse, asserts that there was no car around whatsoever. He is a suspicious character, that man. It would seem to me the most natural thing in the world for the police to pounce upon him. People have their heads chopped off for less, but you may be sure that nothing of the sort has happened. They did not dream of seeing him in the possible murder. No, the guilt has been laid upon me straightway, unobservedly, with cold and callous promptitude, as though they were joyfully eager to convict me, as though it were vengeance, as though I had long been offending them, and they had long been thirsting to punish me. Not only taking for granted with strange prejudication the dead man cannot be I, not only failing to observe our resemblance, but, as it were, a priori, excluding its possibility, for people do not see what they are loath to see. The police gave a brilliant example of logic when they expressed their surprise at my having hoped to deceive the world by simply dressing up in my clothes an individual who was not in the least like me. The imbecility and the blatant unfairness of such reasoning are hardly comic. The next logical step was to make me mentally deficient. They even went so far as to suppose that I was not quite sane, and certain persons knowing me confirmed this. That, Orlovius, among others, wonder who the others were, his story being that I used to write letters to myself, rather unexpected. What baffled the police absolutely was the question, how did my victim, the word victim was particularly relished by the press, came to be in my clothes, or better say, how had I managed to force a live man to put on not only my suit, but down to my socks and shoes, which being too small for him, ought to have hurt. Well, as shoeing him, I could have done that post factum, wise guys. In getting into their heads that it was not my corpse, they behaved just as the literary critic does, who at the mere sight of a book by an author whom he does not favor makes up his mind that the book is worthless, and thence proceeds to build whatever he wants to build, and the basis that first gratuitous assumption. Thus, faced by the miracle of Felix's resemblance to me, they hurled themselves upon such small and quite immaterial blemishes as would, given deeper and finer attitude toward my masterpiece, pass unnoticed. The way a beautiful book is not in the least impaired by a misprint or a slip of the pen. They mentioned the roughness of the hands, they even sought some horny growth of the gravest significance, noting nevertheless the neatness of the nails of our four extremities, and somebody, in the best of my belief, the hairdresser who found the body, drew the sleuth's attention to the fact that on the strength of certain details visible to a professional lovely that it was clear that the nails had been pared by an expert, which ought to have inculpated him and not me. Try as I may, I cannot find what Lydia's demeanor at the inquest. Has none doubted that the murdered man was not I? She has certainly been, or still is, suspected of complicity. Her own fault, to be sure, ought to have had understood that the insurance money had faded into thin air, so no use butting in with widows' wailings. She will break down in the long run, and never questioning my innocence, but striving to save my head, will give away my brother's tragic story, to no avail, however, for it may be established without much difficulty that I had never any brother. And as the suicide theory, Well, there is hardly any chance of the official imagination swallowing that trigger as string stunt. Of the greatest importance to my present security is the fact that the murdered man's identity is unknown and cannot be known. Meanwhile, I have been living under his name, traces of which I have already left here and there, so that I might be able to run to earth in no time were it discovered whom I have in the accepted term plugged. But there is no way of discovering it, which suits me admirably, as I am too tired to palm and act all over again, and indeed how could I divest myself of a name which such art I have made my own, for I look like my name, gentlemen, and it fits me as exactly as it used to fit him. You must be fools not to understand. Now as to that car, it ought to be found sooner or later, not that it will help them much, for I wanted it to be found. What fun! They think I am meekly sitting at the wheel, whereas actually they will find a very ordinary and very scared thief.